The 2021 season for Aston Martin was quite underwhelming for the team, to say the least. They did not have the car they did in 2020. They dropped all the way down to P7 in the constructors' standings, mainly because they did not have the pink Mercedes as they did in 2020. They of course changed from Racing Point to Aston Martin, and the team expects to improve in the next few years, as they've got much more backing from Lawrence Stroll. Would they be able to move forward in 2022? Well, the season started off with the worst possible start, with Sebastian Vettel catching COVID-19, which meant that he would miss the first 2 rounds of the season in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and Nico Hülkenberg stepped in. In Bahrain, Hülkenberg would outqualify Stroll, which was a surprise, but Stroll would beat Hülkenberg only in P12, showing how that Aston Martin was very poor. In Saudi Arabia, yet again in the race, the team would score no points again, and the car was probably the second worst on the grid, with only the Williams being the worst. Hülkenberg would finish in P12, with Stroll in P13, showing that they had room for improvements to even score points due to how close the midfield was. On to Australia and the return of Sebastian Vettel, however, Seb would have an awful weekend, crashing in FP3, which meant that he could only do 1 lap in qualifying. Then in the race, he would simply just lose the back end of the car, meaning that he would hit the barriers and be out of the race, not the comeback he had hoped for. Stroll would also have a poor weekend, crashing in qualifying with Latifi, and then in the race would finish in P12 and out the points for the 3rd race in a row. In Imola, their fortunes would change massively, and they would finally score points, but in style too. Both drivers would score with Vettel in P8 and Stroll in P10. Massive progress for the team after 3 races with no points. In Miami, the team would take another point in P10 with Stroll, showing that they're getting better and better as the races came and went. However, Vettel would DNF with just a few laps left to go, as he would have a crash with his good friend Mick Schumacher. It was not Seb's fault at all, as Mick went for a move when there was no room. In Spain, Aston Martin will bring in their first line of upgrades, but with some controversy as the car looked very similar to the Red Bull, with of course Red Bull not happy at all. However, these upgrades would not do much as both of the drivers would finish outside of the points, even if they copied the fastest car. Monaco would be another okay weekend with Seb showing what he can do, getting P10, whilst Lance Stroll crashed on the formation lap and finished in P14. A weekend to forget for him, but a good one for Seb. Baku was a huge step forward for Aston Martin, having their best finish yet, with Vettel finishing in P6, even though he made a mistake that lost him some positions, still being able to hold his own and take away 8 points. However, it was not good for Stroll as he would crash twice over the weekend and DNF in the race. At the Canadian GP, Lance would actually outperform Seb at his home Grand Prix, of course, with him finishing in P10 and getting a point. Vettel just had a very poor weekend with him coming in P12. At the British Grand Prix, the team would once again make some more progress and score even more points with Vettel in P9, and of course Stroll was outside the points in P11. However, in Austria it was a dreadful weekend for the team, with Vettel coming last to the runners due to contact with Gasly, which was not his fault. The team hoped Lance could do something for them. He would not, crossing the line in P13. At the French GP, it would be very close between Stroll and Vettel, who would fight very close to the line for P10, and almost touched. But it was Stroll who won the battle and took home a point. Clearly, the Aston Martin had become a solid race car compared to Bahrain. Just before the Hungarian Grand Prix, Vettel announced his retirement, and he of course wanted the rest of his season to be good and end on a high. In Hungary, he would finish the race in P10, just ahead of his teammate to take some solid points for the team. After the summer break, the team would score points for the 3rd place in a row with Vettel taking a solid P8, while Stroll finished in P11 once again. Now it was looking like Aston Martin could potentially finish P6 in the standings, which would be huge, as how bad they started the season. On to the Netherlands and more points for the team, but this time for Lance Stroll, who finished in P10, so good for the team once again. Vettel, however, just had a poor weekend for once and would cross the line in P14. Monza is a very tough track on the engine and car, and this was shown for Aston Martin as they would have their first double DNF of the season. Clearly not what the drivers and team need, as they fight to continue to fight up the midfield after being rock bottom after the first few races. Singapore would be massive for Aston Martin, where they would get a huge amount of points with Stroll having an impressive P6 finish. This was whilst Vettel finished in P8 after being overtaken by Verstappen, right near the end of the race after a good battle between the past and present Red Bull drivers. Japan would be an excellent race for Vettel, as he would produce a huge comeback drive. After the restart, he was at the back of the grid, and took a gamble to go onto the inters pretty early, meaning he got the undercut on a lot of people. He would drive a fantastic race and would finish in P6 after a dash to the line, where he just edged Alonso out by 0.01 seconds. Lance, on the other hand, would again finish outside the points in P12, showing how the difference in class was between the two drivers. In the United States, Vettel would again have a fantastic race and would produce an awesome overtake on the Haas just before the final corner to make sure he secured P8 and some huge points as they pushed for P6 in the Constructors. Guess where Lance was? If you guessed not in the points, you would be right, and he would DNF on lap 21. Mexico would be a very poor race, and one to forget with both the Astons out of the points in P14 and P15. Not exactly what they would have wanted. In Brazil in the sprint, both drivers would get very close, and Lance would force Vettel off the track in a very dangerous move, giving him a 10-second penalty. In the race, however, Lance would actually beat Seb and finish in P10, leaving them needing 6 points in Abu Dhabi if the Alfa Romeos didn't finish. Well, in Seb's last ever race in the sport, he would finish in P10 after a strategy error by his team, which meant he stayed out for way too long. Lance would finish in P8, getting 4 points, and this meant that both Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo finished on the same amount of points. However, due to Alfa Romeo finishing in a higher position over the season, in Bahrain in P5, it meant that they won the battle for P6. Overall, this season for Aston Martin could be considered a success, due to them having one of the worst cars at the start, to being one of the better midfield cars at the end. It is clear that they developed very well but just missed out on P6, which would have been an improvement from 2021. In 2023, with Fernando Alonso replacing Vettel, they really hope to continue to improve after Lawrence Stroll wants them to start winning titles in the next few years. Will that be possible? Was this season a success for the team in green? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and make sure to like the video and subscribe for more videos just like this one.